understanding. Does God change? No. But does our understanding of him change? And does God have the ability to allow for certain things in some instances and not in others? Absolutely, right? Remember idol meat? Remember what he said about eating meat that's offered to idols? He's like, hey, it might be right for you, but wrong for them. So God allows for some of this. It's not always black and white, true, false, the way we understand it. So this passage, as we're talking about here, is a little bit of like this. It's talking about there are true followers and false followers of Jesus. I am so loud. I am so sorry. I feel bad. And please understand, I love it so much that you're here. I know you do not feel bad. I'm going to cry. I'm so excited that she's here, that she's allowed to cry the whole time. And I'll try and keep it down. I'll keep it down. False followers. It starts out, this is mostly about false followers, but we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a true follower. So let's look at Matthew 7, 15 through 20. It says this, beware of false prophets who come disguised as harmless sheep, but are really vicious wolves. You can identify them by their fruit, that is the way they act. Can you pick grapes from bushes or figs from thistles? A good tree produces good fruit. A bad tree produces, bad fruit. A good tree can't produce bad fruit, and a bad tree can't produce good fruit. You notice the trend? I think he's trying to get a point across here, since he said it 7 different ways. So every tree that does not produce good fruit is chopped down and thrown into the fire. Yes, just as you can identify a tree by its fruit, you can also identify people by their actions. So just a few little thoughts. I don't want to belabor it. There's so much here we could spend hours, but I just want to talk about a few things. One of the ones that was before Deb left, that she took me out to her garden, and like I said, one of my main responsibilities, I was telling Brent, one of my main jobs is continuing to keep her garden alive while she's gone. And I spend a lot of time doing it, because I'm a little afraid that she's going to come home and she'll be like, oh, the zinnias are not, not this, she keeps, didn't make, or she'll ask me like, did such and such bloom? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know, is it a flower? What? And realized she had to point out what different things were to me, and some super basic stuff. One of them was we have several little miniature fruit trees, and we have an apple tree, a pear tree, and a cherry tree. And she said, I think the cherries are coming in, so watch for them. And I realized, I don't know which tree is the cherry tree. You know how I know it's a cherry tree? It has cherries on it. So it doesn't do me a lot of good to be able, that's the only way to look. That's what this is saying. This idea that, you know what? Actions do matter. As much as this passage, and remember the context here. The whole thing is talking about, it's about your heart. It's about our walk, our inner man. So this doesn't negate all this. This is saying, yes, now that we know all of that is true, the previous 2 chapters saying that real followers, people who are part of the kingdom, we've got to do better than just rules and following actions and the outward appearance. We've got to do better, right? We've got to have a better heart. We've got to follow Jesus in our soul. But beyond that, that will then affect our actions, not the other way around. So first of all, he talks about this idea of wolves in sheep's clothing. And this gets used a lot because it's a terrifying picture. That somebody would come in and look innocent, look like part of us, look like something that is harmless, that is intent on doing harm. That they have no intention of being part of the flock, part of the family. They are disguising themselves as something harmless, who come in to prey on sheep. And I love that this is one of those times where I think that the verse breaks make it sometimes confusing, or even in your Bibles you may notice sometimes they have little headings. I think this is one of those that I wish wasn't there necessarily, because we just finished talking about the narrow way and the broad way, the easy way and the difficult way. I think the wolves that are coming in are ones that are offering the broad way, the way to destruction. This is the easy way to be a Christian. This is the easy way to follow Jesus. It's not through outsiders. It's not the world coming in and trying to destroy the church. This is the church destroying itself. People who've misunderstood and are leading other people the wrong way, saying, hey, it's going to be easy. And you know my view of what is easy. My view of what is easy is, hey, follow these 9 rules. Do it this way, look this way, act this way, be like us, and follow the way we are. Specifically talking about leaders, this is a terrifying passage for a pastor. One thing I just want to make really clear, when I read the Bible, especially when I'm preparing for a sermon, pastors, I think one of our weaknesses is we read the words of God and the commands of God, and we kind of adopt that. When we're reading this, we kind of think of ourselves as the voice of God, which is true. There's some of it that we're called to explain what this book says and what Jesus says to us, and the Spirit moves us to explain it and encourage and motivate and sometimes chastise. But mostly we got to remember, just because we're doing that doesn't mean that we are God. What comes out of my mouth is not God's. It's my understanding. It's hopefully my Spirit-empowered, rigorously studied, lived experience to be able to share insight, but I am not God. The minute I begin to act like God, I hope you call me a wolf. How do we know the difference between a wolf, a leader who is a wolf, and a leader who is a sheep? It requires time and proximity. Time and nearness. When someone is disguised, the last thing they want you to do is get right up close and examine. I was listening to a podcast about a guy who was an ex-CIA agent overseas, a spy, field operative. And was talking about how they did it and what they would do. And most of it was just kind of being anonymous or having some feature that everyone noticed about them so that they would forget all the rest. But their main deal was always to be able to keep a distance. It was fascinating. They said that the issue was, though, that in their disguise, when they actually had to use a physical disguise, the goal was to keep distance so nobody would come and examine them too closely. The way to tell if someone who is trying to lead is a wolf or a sheep is to spend time with them and to be near them. I hope that, I was telling Deb when I was reading this, I'm like, this is scary. I hope that that's one of the benefits of being a small congregation. That we can know each other and we can be around each other. For a long time I thought this was a weakness until I'm so thankful for my friend Jim Walter, who was my boss for so long, and the pastor here, who was like, I'm like, yeah, sometimes I feel like I spend too much time getting coffee and hanging out with people, and I should be doing more administrative. And he's like, no, he's like, let me do that. You go do that thing of being around people. And I think one of my weaknesses is I am an extrovert and I like being around you. Now, I can still hide it. I can understand that I can still I can still hide my weaknesses and my struggles. But I hope that if we're around each other long enough, I hope that, for instance, the guys in LifePath with me, that people that I get coffee with, the groups that I spend time with, could look at me at times and go, something's weird. Than normal with you. I'm fortunate for my friend Trish, where there are times that I have really been defensive or cranky, or one of my big weaknesses is once I make a plan, I kind of want it to go that way and not be changed. For instance, important things like where we put the bounce house with Elder Tuesday. Years ago, I had a way that I set it up, and Trish came in one day and was like, hey, why don't we do it this other way? And I was so like, I'm not willing to acknowledge that was better, just because it wasn't my plan. And Trish has made fun of me for years. Her and Jim, every time I would kind of be acting like that, they'd be like, where should we put that bounce house? That was shorthand for, oh, you're being defensive and cranky. You know how we know that? They're around me. We need to get to know each other. And I would say this, that the sheep, or the wolves in sheep's clothing, are not just pastors. They can be people too. How do we avoid that? How do we discern that? How do we know that? Spend time together. And if you have nothing to hide, let people in. I think that one of the ways that certain leaders and certain organizations allow wolves in is authoritative. The best defense is a good offense. Anytime that you have an issue, they come back at you. Oh yeah, but you are worse, right? Or how dare you question my authority? So don't do that to each other. Don't devour each other. Allow people into your life close enough, spend time, and be near enough that you can know when something's weird. I love that about a small church. Now, I don't think we should stay small. I think God is going to bring us more and more people who have been damaged other places. And some people who are just not damaged as normal. Well, we're all damaged, but you know what I'm saying? Like, that people will come and be a part. And I hope at that point that we have this as so much of a foundation of who we are that we just never let go of it. We always have time and proximity together, whether leaders or just congregants. One of the other ways to tell is we'll talk about the fruit, but if someone appears harmless, but then they're attacking people all the time, they might be a wolf. If it's always about how bad somebody else is, how bad another pastor is, how bad another church is, how bad an organization is, they might be a wolf. Again, because it's the Broadway, wolves often are looking to the popular, whatever gets them more power, more gold, more popularity. And it just reminds us that good theology and having a big ministry is not enough. A lot of wolves have good theology and have big ministry, but are not being used by God. I think also sometimes when we're in wolf mode, we use eternity, we use heaven and hell as a way to manipulate and get what we want. What do I mean by that? I mean that we use that to justify greed and hate and division rather than the harmony, the beauty, the anointing oil of harmony, of unity. That we become gatekeepers. Wolves become gatekeepers. You're not in, you're going to hell and you're going to heaven. Because that's what I think. Rather than loving people and caring for people and bringing them closer to Jesus. We just need to remember that not just ministers, but all of us can exhibit and look like we have such great gifts and such great things to offer and try desperately to hide our weaknesses. And how do we find out? How do we know? How do we evaluate ourselves and others? Fruit. Fruit. If we say we're a cherry tree and we have apples, we're not a cherry tree. Right? So what fruit should we look for? What is that? That's easy to say about a tree because, it's a tree. How do we look for that in a person? How do we begin to evaluate ourselves and those around us to see what is the fruit? I think the one big one is words. The way we exert our power is words. What do we say? What comes out of our mouths all the time? Is it encouraging? Is it Christ-like? Is it loving? Or is it attacking? Is it contradiction? Is it cranky? Is it unloving? I think sometimes instead of good fruit, we look for things like somebody saying the right things. Sometimes, I will say, different ministries, different times, we have used attendance or money or attention rather than producing good fruit. Bad fruit is becoming more selfish and more judging. Good fruit are people who become more selfless and more compassionate. If someone says they're a follower of Jesus and they're becoming more and more rigid and more angry and more attacking, that's bad fruit. But if someone says they're a follower of Jesus and they're becoming more and more compassionate, more and more kind, more and more loving, that's good fruit. One of the things, again, Dad's on my mind for some reason today. One of the things I loved about my dad, the older he got, and even as he began to struggle with dementia and struggle physically, he became sweeter and sweeter and nicer as he got older. I hope that that's true of me. I think what was in his soul came out. I'm afraid I'm going to get more and more sarcastic. and so I'm praying that God can change me before that time. The fruit we look for is not just gifts and abilities, but the fruit of the Spirit. Right? What did Jesus say is going to be the fruit? That we are compassionate, we're not selfish, that we love others. How do we grow good fruit? You know what? Those trees are not trying at all at our house. We have one, the cherry tree is trying a little bit, but the apple trees have given up. You know what I don't see the apple tree doing out there at night? It's just shaking and like, I'm going to push out an apple. The apple tree depends on me, or let me rephrase it, Deb, to go out and water it and fix the soil and make sure it's planted where there's right light. That's what those plants need, is somebody caring for them, and the plant just does what's normal. Growing good or bad fruit is effortless and natural. What we are in the inside and what we are looking for, what is feeding us, is what will come out without trying. comes from the inside out. And so if we're only feeding ourselves bad stuff, if we are not connected to Jesus, bad fruit's going to come out, or none fruit. But if we are connected to Jesus, if we are praying, if we have a relationship with God, we're not going to have to try so hard. We'll just be. Because the God of the universe is watering us and feeding us. And that's hard because we are definitely in a self-help culture in America and in the church. But hey, I get it. I run a 12-step group. It's all about the self-help. Yes, there's stuff we need to do to cultivate and to connect ourselves to God, but all of that stuff needs to be to connect us to Jesus. That's the purpose, that we have connection and relationship with Jesus. It's not about us doing more work to fix ourselves. It's allowing the God of the universe to fix us. And so ask yourself, if my beliefs about Jesus help me become a more selfless, compassionate person who lives this out on a daily, through daily acts of loving kindness, then that is excellent. We are producing excellent fruit. But if my beliefs about Jesus are gatekeeping, if my beliefs about Jesus are toxic, if my beliefs about Jesus are attacking others, and my main goal is to preserve the faith by making sure you know you're not in, is that the narrow way? No, remember we talked about that's really the broad way. Because that's just about follow all the rules. Not accepting that it's difficult to allow Jesus to change our lives. The image of the tree reminds us that fruit flows from behavior, or fruit reminds us that behavior flows from character, and character comes through being born again rather than through self-discipline. Our own best efforts are doomed for failure. That's what I mean. The broad way is, hey, I just need to get the right formula. I just need to have the right rules and everything's going to be good. The narrow way is, I'm going to let Jesus change my life and just pursue him. A person dependent on the power of God's Spirit will live according to the traits of God's character because God's empowerment, just as trees bear fruit according to their own kind. And where do we see fruit? It's always in relationship. It's always in relationship to each other. So what do? Just a quick application. What fruit do we look for? Let's make sure we're looking for each other and in churches and in people, that we are looking not for effectiveness and power and impact and influence and popularity and relevance. Maybe we should be looking for generosity and mercy and honesty, transparency, gentleness, faithfulness, and humility. It's easy to follow a wolf. It's easy to be a wolf because we like being disguised and hiding our failures. The more we do that, the more angry it becomes, and the more we devour, and the more we push people away. We need to work on just loving Jesus and allowing Jesus to feed us and change us. So what are true followers? Real quickly, there's just one little line. There's some more points to make here, but a primary line here in chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We performed many miracles in your names. But I will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's laws. Again, I want us to remember everything we've talked about for the last couple of months about the Sermon on the Mount. What does it mean to be a real follower? All of those things, being humble, being broken, being poor. Again, not that we need to pursue it, but those are the attributes. All of the things that are counterintuitive, that we need to follow with our heart, that we need to be connected to God, and then following the rules comes after that. So there's no way Jesus is suddenly now saying, here's the thing, follow every rule. What he's saying now is follow my rule, follow the Jesus creed. Love God and love people. That's hard enough. That's hard. Remember when he talked about rules, like he was saying, you may not have to commit adultery to be just as bad if you lust. You may not have to murder. It's just as bad if you're angry. He's saying we've got to do better. It is your heart. This is what I mean. You need to follow God's law. The ones who follow God's law are the ones who love God with all their heart and love their neighbors. This means many are going to be surprised at the end. Good theology and a big ministry is not enough. Being used by God is not the same as belonging to God. It's the difference between, again, big word, sorry, orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Orthodoxy, right belief. Orthopraxy, right action. I'm becoming less and less caring about orthodoxy. Let's live right. Orthopraxy, let's live right. Right belief or right living, every day following Jesus. In fact, the Greek word for belief, again, I don't do this very often, the old Greek word thing. I do study it, believe it or not. It's translated belief in the English, but it's, you know what it is? It's a verb. It's an action verb. It means to be persuaded. Persuasion means you do something. You're convinced of something, so you do something. We're motivated to action. I think we've removed and we've dumbed down belief to just be mental assent. It's more than that. It's how we live. People who call him Lord, Lord are showing belief and mental assent. And they might really feel it. But if it doesn't change how they live, if it doesn't change their heart and cause them to produce good fruit, then they are not really there. If we are saying, Lord, Lord, if we believe all the right stuff, but it doesn't change who we are, and it doesn't produce good fruit, then we're going to be some of those standing at the end going, hey, wait, I thought I had it all. I believed all the right stuff. I even accused others of not believing the right stuff. I kicked people out because they didn't believe the right stuff, Jesus. And Jesus says, you missed it. You missed it. Following my word, being obedient to me is loving God and loving others. The difference between believing mentally and doing is the difference between a written test. I read this from Scott McKnight. It's the difference between a written test and a lab. Believing right is going into the written test, like the driving test. You can pass the driving test. It's a whole different thing when you get behind the wheel. Ask Katie, my daughter. Passed the written test. Did not pass the driving test and said, I'm not driving. We need to pass both. We need to, yes, believe what's right. But it's the only way we know. How do we know we pass? It changes how we drive. We follow the way of Jesus. Just like the difference between saying, I love you, and actually loving someone. I love you. To say to somebody, but if we don't do any loving acts, it's not love. Devotion to God and devotion to God's mission. Devotion to God's mission is not the same as devotion to God. Believing and understanding is different than living. We show our love for God by actually doing the will of the Father. The Message, Eugene Peterson says it this way: serious obedience is doing what the Father wills. What does the Father will? We love him with all of our heart, all of our soul, and that we love others. We love God enough to love others. And I think it's important to really love others. You know how we do that? Daily, caring for the people around us, being kind and gentle and exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit. We've gotten so good at making eternity the only thing that matters, and we make love this abstract thing where then we can almost retcon any of our actions and any of our words and to say, well, that's being loving because I'm telling them the truth, or I'm forcing them, I'm putting them in a place where they must assent to the right thing to get into heaven. I get that all the time. I get attacked by other pastors. A little bit of sharing. I get attacked by other pastors because some of the things that I believe, and they're saying that that's not love because you're letting them go to hell. I'm like, well, A, that's not my call, right? And B, I'm not sure somebody believing all the right stuff is what gets us into heaven. And frankly, I'm going to let God take care of heaven. I want people to be loved and love God and love people right here, right now, starting the journey today and into the future. That's really loving. Daily, loving actions, fruit that is verifiable as from God because it's actually loving to somebody. If you have to explain why something is loving to them when it seems like hate, it's probably you're doing something wrong. Right? It's like telling a joke. If somebody doesn't laugh and you have to explain it, it's probably not a good joke. If someone feels hated and we say, no, that's love, it's probably not love. I don't know why I'm shouting at you guys. You guys don't do this. I am so sorry. Real fruit that is naturally and effortlessly produced in our lives are loving words and actions to the people in our life. The real good fruit is loving the people in our lives. So what do? We commune with God to the point of being a real follower of Jesus. We see clearly that we can have right theology and right teaching and fight the right battles, even maybe even do miracles and signs, but not know God. Or worse, not be known by Him. Instead, we need to pursue and admire and love God and love His people. So we'll leave with this. Galatians 5:22 and 23. The Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against these things. May we be a people who want only to know God and allow that deep relationship produce genuine fruit of love for others as we admire and serve with those who love the same. Thank you, guys. Thanks for letting me rant a little bit. I'm sorry. And we will see you next Sunday. Thanks. Just as I hear so many things on our hearts, so many things to pray for, it's almost an impossible task to share and connect. And yet I know as we're speaking together, we can be praying at the same time you're with us and around us. But God, I ask that we would take time throughout our week to remember these requests, remember these burdens, remember these issues, bring them before you consciously, purposefully, intentionally, verbally, to remind you that we need your help. And remind us that we need your help. And remind each other that we need your help. God, we are dependent on you, and I'm so thankful that we are because we know you come through. So God, whether it's family, whether it's illness, whether it is just a weightiness in our heart, we know that you care about all of it, and that you are enough for everything we need, all the time, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally. So God, we ask that help us to turn to you for our needs and for the needs of those around us. And we thank you for this great time to come before you. In Jesus' name, amen. When I was in college, I had a professor, you guys know this, I was a political theory major, and so small college, small major, I spent almost all of my upper division major coursework with one professor. And he had some quirks, and one of my favorite quirks of this guy is he always said, your test will be true, false, and multiple guess, which I think he was speaking directly to me because most of it was multiple guess. Like, I don't know, this sounds right. Rousseau. That was how most of my answers were. And so today we're talking about what's true and false. True and false is a little harder because sometimes it's really easy on a true-false test, right? There's something that's clearly wrong and something that's clearly right. But if it's a well-written test, they both will seem right or they'll both seem wrong, right? Yes. And so sometimes we run into that where it seems it's not as easy as we would like it to believe. Things about the Bible, we would like it to be this is right, this is wrong, and everybody should agree on this, and we all know. And the reality is some of it is nuanced. We've talked about that a lot recently. That it's not always that easy to tell, and then sometimes something might be true at one point and false later. Now I know that goes against kind of all my